Okay, so welcome. We have a special guest tonight, Garrett. He's a good friend of mine. He's my financial advisor. We saw in the bio that I sent you in GroupMe where he works and just a little bit about his family and things. And he's also on the board for lunch. And so we just really appreciate him, enjoy having him come and teach every year for exit strategy. And so before he gets started, I'm just going to have everybody start over here with Zach. Just say your name, what you're studying, and when you think you're going to be graduating, because we have some new faces too. And then I'll just turn it over to Garrett. And I'm going to go help them try to find some chairs. These two things would need to be passed out. So go ahead and start.
Okay.
Casey's in charge.
I'm in the Construction Engineering Management Program. I'm graduating in May.
I'm Brandon, aerospace engineering, and I graduate in December.
I'm Hank, aeronautical engineering technology, and then unmanned aero systems, 2 majors. Hopefully in the spring, but I'll probably fall.
I'm Harrison, I'm in robotics, and I'm hoping to graduate in the spring as well.
I'm Ben, I'm in professional flight technology, and I'll be graduating this spring.
I'm Emma, I'm studying environmental engineering, and I'm graduating today.
And then I'm studying construction management, and I'll hopefully graduate in spring, but that's possible.
I'm Hallie, I'm studying industrial engineering and graduating in the spring.
I'm Jenna, I'm in wildlife, and I'll be graduating in the spring.
I'm Casey, I'm double majoring in biomedical engineering and linguistics, and I'll graduate in May.
Alright, well it's nice to meet all you guys. I guess I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up here in Lafayette. I went to Purdue. I graduated in 2007. I am married with 2 daughters that are 9 and 12. And like Nettie said, I'm a financial advisor. So primarily what that means is managing people's assets for them, primarily retirement accounts. We also do planning for education, saving for college, that sort of thing, and life insurance, tax planning, estate planning, that sort of thing. So today we're gonna basically do like a crash course on finances, some of you may have had parents that taught you some of this, some of you may not, it might be new stuff, but we're going to cover a lot of ground and talk about what the Bible says about money, talk about budgeting, and then at the end we'll have a time where you guys can ask any questions that you have. So hopefully there'll be some good information for you in here, but a lot of this is kind of just to get started, and if you want to learn more, I recommend taking a class that's called Financial Peace University. It's a class I've done. It's led by Dave Ramsey, but he's got a lot of really good advice about paying off debt and budgeting and saving and things like that. So some of that stuff we're going to talk about tonight.
Garrett, I'm so sorry, I forgot to tell him. On your Google Doc, scroll all the way down to the bottom, because it's the very last chapter, and they're all, remember the headers are all in red. So at the very bottom it says Financial Faithfulness, chapter 12. That's where you can take notes and things of what he's talking about. Sorry.
All right, so let's start off with taking a look at what the Bible says about money. We're going to read a lot of different Bible verses, and if I could, I'll have you guys read them for me. So if you have some volunteers, I'll just go ahead and start with the first one. Is Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. Can somebody read that for us? Thank you. Yeah.
No one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and man.
So yeah, I love this verse, especially the end there where it says you cannot serve both God and money. And I heard someone once say you you can tell what's most important to someone by looking at their calendar and their checkbook. Checkbooks aren't used as much today as they used to be, but I think it's a valid point of you can tell what's important to people by how they spend their time and how they spend their money. And so I think the choices we make about money reveals our deepest values. And so if you look at the way you spend your money, it might show you if you're serving God or if you're serving money. Can anyone think of an example of how money could be used as a distraction that would take our focus off of God?
I think just working all the time, you know.
Yep.
You don't have time for events, for the church, for people, and prioritizing that over actually having time to.
Yeah, that's a great example. Can we have someone read 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 17 through 19?
I knew. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life.
All right, so this verse says, God who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy, and then later it says to be generous and to be ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future. So thinking about that verse, do you guys think it's a sin to be rich, to have a lot of money?
It depends on your heart attitude towards your money that you have.
I think that's exactly right, yeah. So let's take a look at 1 Timothy 6 through 10 and see if that answers that question. So someone read that for us, 1 Timothy 6:10.
I can do that. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs.
So what does that say is the root of all kinds of evil? Love of money. So I think that's the key word there is the love of money, not just money itself. Money is not the root of evil, but the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So I'm gonna say a few statements, and I want you guys to think if they're true or false. We'll do these one at a time. So the first one is, if you were to buy a house that's $200,000 and put down a 20% down payment, and your interest rate is 5%, which is actually low today, and you pay it back over 30 years, which is a typical mortgage time frame, you would actually end up spending over $300,000 to own that $200,000 home. You guys think that's true or false? See some people nodding. Anyone? Yeah, so that is actually true. And so it's kind of hard to think that you would pay over $100,000 in interest payments. But borrowing that amount of money, $200,000, the interest on that is pretty significant, especially if you're paying it over 30 years. So it's pretty amazing. All right, another statement. A car payment is unavoidable for recent graduates. Is that true or false?
I guess it just depends. Like, I have a buddy who, right out of college, he was making 6 figures, so for him, probably not. But, yeah, for me, who's still going to be working at Chick-fil-A, probably.
So I think I agree with you that it does depend, but I think I would say it's avoidable for most graduates. Some advice that Dave Ramsey gives is to buy a whatever vehicle you can afford at the time, even if it's a old, really old car that has a lot of miles on it. And then, rather than, if you bought a new car, you're gonna have a car payment. So let's say you're paying $300 or $400 a month for that car payment. Instead of doing that, set that money aside in a savings account and save it for your next car. And then, after a couple of years, you'll have a decent amount saved up, and then you can take that money to trade the car in for a car that's a little bit nicer. Continue doing that, saving that money each month rather than doing your car payment. And then a few years later, you can trade it in for a car that's a little bit nicer. But I definitely recommend paying cash for a vehicle if you can, and I also recommend buying a used car if you can over a new car. Another kind of unbelievable statistic is new cars lose about 11% of their value as soon as you drive it off the lot. So cars are a depreciating asset, meaning the value is going to go down, even regardless of how much you drive it, and especially in the first couple of years, they lose a lot of value. So if you can buy a used car, it's a lot better value than buying a brand new car. And if you can do it paying as much as you can with cash, then you have a smaller car payment. You can set aside more to save up for your next vehicle. So let's see here. Next statement is the average consumer spends 12 to 18% more if they pay with a credit card versus paying with cash. I think that's true or false? Yeah, so this is true. So credit cards are a tool just like money is, so they're not inherently bad, but they can be dangerous if you don't use them responsibly. So today, the average American has over $5,000 in credit card debt, according to a survey done by USA Today. And credit cards are useful. They're a good way to help you build credit, which is something that you need to do, that you need to start doing after college. But I would encourage you, if you have a credit card, to treat it as a bill that you pay off every month, not to just let the balance sit there. A lot of credit cards can have really high interest rates that are close to 20%, and that can really add up. So a lot of credit cards have some sort of cash back or some sort of rewards where you can earn points, and so that's an advantage as long as you use the card and then pay it off each month and don't carry a balance. But for a lot of people, that can be a real struggle, that if you use a credit card, you might end up spending more than you would if you were spending cash, and it's easy to let that interest build up, and then it gets to a point where it gets really hard to pay off. So just try to be really, really intentional if you're using a credit card, and try to pay it off every month if you can, so that you're not carrying a balance, and that way it can be a good tool versus something that can get you into trouble. All right, another statement. All right, well, this is about saving for retirement. Let's say we have two different people, both saving $200 a month that they're setting aside for retirement. But Anne starts at age 18, and she stops 10 years later when she's 28. So she only saves a total of $24,000. John starts later. He doesn't start saving until he's 28. But then he saves all the way up until he's 65. So he saves a total of $88,000. By age 65, if they have this money invested, Anne would have $1.4 million, while John would only have $870,000. You guys think that's possible when she only saved $24,000 and he saved almost 4 times that much? It is possible due to the power of compounding of interest. And so this is really important while you're young, because each year, earlier you start, the more powerful that is. And so it's really hard to save money for retirement when you're fresh out of college. A lot of times that's going to be the lowest income that you have, when you're right out of college, and so it's hard to do that. But I would encourage you guys to try to set good habits as early as you can, because those habits are hard to change. And so if you're able to start saving money right out of college, hopefully you can continue that habit. And I found that it's not something you think it'd get easier the more money you make, but it really doesn't. I find that it really doesn't matter if you start out of college not saving money and you get a raise, you're probably not going to be able to start saving more. You're probably going to find ways to spend it, and so I would really encourage you to save at least 10% of what you make for retirement. 15% is even better, but regardless of what your income is, if you're able to save at least 10% of it, you should be in good shape, whether your income is $30,000 a year or $200,000 a year. It doesn't really matter. As long as you set aside 10% of that, when you start young, you should be fine to retire once you get to that age. So really encourage you guys to start that early if you can, although I know it is difficult to do. All right, so kind of what I was mentioning before, the decisions you make about money today and right after college will shape the rest of your life, and so it's really important to be intentional and to have a game plan. The number one reason that people go to college is typically to get a good job and to be able to earn more money. Like we talked about earlier, the Bible doesn't say that it's bad to make a lot of money. It's bad to love money and to prioritize money over your relationship with God. So it's good to have a healthy perspective on this. The more money you make, the more money you can give away, the more money you can use to further God's kingdom. And so I think it is something that there are verses in the Bible that talk about being responsible or being good stewards, and so I think it is something that's important to God that we make smart choices about how we use our money. All right, can someone read Matthew 6:21 for us?
Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
So I think this verse is kind of similar to that first one we read, and in fact it's just 3 verses earlier. When it says we can't serve both God and money, but where we put our treasure, that's where our heart will be. How would you describe a person who handles their money well and has a good biblical attitude about their money? Do you think of any examples of what that might look like to honor God with our money?
I had someone share a story once about like a man who was a part of their church, and that he, and it was a very extreme example, but like holes in the jeans, like you would have never thought that he had money. And when he died, he left over $1 million, I think, to like the church and the school. But also a different story of somebody who, like, as their income increased, like their standard of living stayed the same. And so it was like you were saying, of the more you make, the more you can give. But they took that very seriously and like, this is what I need to live on, and the rest is excess that can go to good, I lost the word, good causes, like good places.
Yep, that's a great example. Can anyone think of any other ways or what it might look like to honor God with money? One thing that I think that we can do is to view all of the money that we have as not really ours, but it's God's, and God is entrusting us to steward that, to use it responsibly, and to kind of give up that ownership, to not think that this is something that we have earned on our own, but that it's something that God has given to us, and it's really His in the end. I think that's a good way to kind of view it. Let's look at Proverbs 27:23. Can someone read that for us?
$27.23?
Yep.
Know well the condition of your flocks, and give attention to your herds.
So, what is this verse saying? What does this have to do with money?
It's like caring for those around us. It could be related to money, like seeing people in need and then helping them with our money.
Yep, yep. I think, that's good. We'll look at some other verses that talk about that more specifically as well. I think one way that we could interpret this would be, I think some people might argue that if we're saving money, that we're not trusting God, that God wants us to trust Him, which He does, but I think it's still important to plan and save and make good decisions so that we can honor God with our finances. And I think this is just kind of an example of saying, in your work, whatever you're doing, if you're a shepherd, you need to give careful attention to what you're doing. And so I think it means it's a way that we can honor God by whatever our job is, by working hard and trying to do a good job to honor Him. But I think it is important for us to work hard and plan and save. And then, like I said, the more money you have, the more money you can give away and honor God in that way. So one thing I would encourage you to do is to pray about money. Ask God to guide you and how He wants you to use the money that you have. And a big part of that is budgeting. If you've never budgeted before, that's something that Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace can help you with. There's some websites you can find that have templates, and we're going to go through some budgeting here in a minute. But that's one thing that you can start doing early that I think is a great habit to start early, so that you know where your money's going. That's the advantage of budgeting. Is if you don't budget, you might get to the end of the month, you don't really know where your money went. You couldn't really answer. If someone asked you, what do you spend your money on? It would be hard to answer that. But if you budget, you can decide how each dollar you have gets spent, and determine what's the best use of it. When you're making a budget, I would encourage you to start with the portion that you want to tithe. Do this first. Make this the first thing that you do. A former Launch alumni once asked her dad if she should tithe on her gross income or her net income. And if you don't know what that means before or after taxes are taken out. So most people maybe don't even know what their gross income is, because all they see is their take-home pay, the amount they get paid after taxes are taken out, which could be a very different number than what you're actually earning before you pay the taxes. And anyway, this particular person, her dad responded and said, well, do you want to be blessed on the level of the gross or the net? And the point of that is you can't outgive God. God is the ultimate giver. He gives so much to us that it's impossible for us to outgive God. And with our tithe, that's one way for us to kind of worship God and to kind of thank Him or give back for all that He's given us. When we talk about tithing, you might hear the term tithes and offerings. Offerings are usually considered different than a tithe, and they're above and beyond a tithe. So typically, a tithe you give to church, and an offering might be something extra above that you might give to another ministry, such as Launch, for example, or an orphanage, or digging a well. Those are examples of different things that you can use your money as an offering to God above what you tithe. Now, some might say that in the New Testament, nowhere does it say that we're supposed to give 10% to the church, but that's just something that was in the Old Testament. That was part of the old law that we no longer have to do. I don't think this is something that necessarily is a requirement. I don't think it's something that is a salvation issue, but I think it's clear that we're supposed to give back to God with a cheerful heart, and I think it is something that not only is it a way to to obey God, but I think it's a way that God uses to change our hearts as well. So if God wants to accomplish something, he doesn't need us to do it for him. He can figure out a way to get it done, but he uses this as a way for us to kind of change our hearts, to make us less selfish, to kind of give up control, to trust God. And so I think it is something that not only is it a way to be obedient and to honor God, but it's a way that brings about personal development that in your own life by doing this practice. So let's have somebody read Leviticus 27:32. We're going to read a few different verses about tithing.
27 what?
32.
I can read it. Unless there's some people.
No, you can
Oh.
read it if you want.
Every tithe of the herd and flock, every 10th animal that passes under the shepherd's rod will be holy to the Lord.
All right, can someone read Genesis 4:4?
Genesis 4.
Yep.
I've got it. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering.
All right, how about Deuteronomy 12:6?
There bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts, what you have vowed to give in your free will offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks.
And this last one, I'll go ahead and read. It's from Malachi 3, verses 8 through 10. It says, "Will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings. You are under a curse, your whole nation, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it." So I think this is the only time in the Bible where God challenges us to test him. And he says that if we do this, that he will pour out so much blessings that there will not be room enough to store it. So there's several verses about tithing, as we just covered. There's lots of verses in the Bible about money. So I think it is something that is very important to God. And I think he knew that it was going to be something that a lot of people struggle with, and it's a way that we can show what's most important to us, if it's our own selfish desires or if we're trying to honor God with our money. Can someone read 2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 7?
Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver.
So I think this verse is really important, especially that last part where it says, God does not want us to give reluctantly or under compulsion. He doesn't want us to come and feel like we're forced to do this because he's asked us to. It says God loves a cheerful giver. So I think, as we've talked about earlier, what's really important is our heart. What is our motivator? Are we doing this cheerfully because we want to, because we're grateful and thankful to God, or are we doing this against our will because we feel like it's something we have to do even though we don't want to? So I think it's really important to have the right heart when we're doing this. So going back to a budget, when you're trying to figure out how, you look at what your income is and you're trying to allocate it to different areas, start with your tithe, figure out how much you want to tithe, what you're convicted about, what you think is the right amount. From there, the second most important thing is savings and paying off debt. So make that be your second priority. There's going to be a lot of things that come up in life that are unexpected. I mean, it seems like it doesn't matter what your situation is, this happens for everyone, where you think you have a plan, you've budgeted. Your budget is going to have to be kind of a flexible document. It's going to change from month to month as you learn how much you need for certain things, but there's going to be unexpected expenses that come up, and so it's important to have an emergency fund set aside to cover those things when they happen. And so it's good to not only just be saving for retirement, but also be setting money aside for emergencies that come up that you need now or in the next few years. The more that you have in savings, the less you're going to be impacted when you have to replace a refrigerator or your car breaks down and you have to, buy some replacement parts or things like that. So. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 13:22 that a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. So I think it is biblical to try to have money set aside, for your children and even your children's children. It's one way that we can demonstrate faithful stewardship of God's money is to live within our means. What does it mean to live within your means? Basically, that means that you're spending less money than you're making. And that can be really challenging if it's something you haven't done up until now. So a lot of times, like I mentioned before, habits you start early are hard to break. And so if you're used to spending more money than you have, that can be a hard habit to break. But I think that's one way that we can be a good steward is by trying to not spend more money than you have. It also means that you'll have more opportunities to bless other people and support different ministries. For example, Launch and all the staff here are supported by donations from churches and individuals, and that's something that you guys could consider doing once you graduate, is supporting ministries like Launch. So I think it's an important distinction to make that saving money is not necessarily the same thing as hoarding money, and it's important that we're not putting our trust and security in our bank account, but we're still trusting God to provide for us. But it's still important to be saving money as you do that. Can someone read Proverbs 11:24-26 for us?
What was that?
Proverbs 11:24-26.
One person gives freely, yet gains more. Another withholds what is right, only to become poor. A generous person will be enriched, and the one who gives a drink of water will receive water. People will curse anyone who hoards grain, but a blessing will come to the one who sells it.
So I think this verse is kind of similar to the one we read earlier that said, whoever sows generously will reap generously. It's just, I think, another verse showing that God is saying that He will bless people that are generous more than He will bless people who are not. Let's look at another verse that's kind of similar. Proverbs 28, verse 22 and 25.
Can read those. A stingy man hastens after wealth and does not know that poverty will come upon him. And 25, a greedy man stirs up strife, but the one who trusts in the Lord will be enriched.
So when it says those who trust in the Lord will be enriched, or another translation will say that they will prosper, I want to make it clear that this is not talking about the prosperity gospel, which I don't know if you've heard that term, but there's some pastors out there that'll say, if you donate to the church, God is guaranteed to bless you financially. And that's not necessarily what this is saying. So it's not saying that the more you give, the more God is going to give you. It doesn't necessarily mean in financial terms. But I do believe that God it's clear in the Bible that God will bless people that give with a cheerful heart. That might not be in financial terms. God does not promise that you will be rich if you give. So that is it's a common, I guess, misconception that some pastors might be giving that message, and that's not necessarily the case. I mean, I think it's clear that Jesus said if we follow Him, life's not going to be easy. Life's going to be challenging, and we shouldn't expect that if we follow Him and do everything that the Bible says, that life's going to be easy and we're going to prosper in every way. But I do think that there are several verses that say that God will bless those that give. So that can look different ways. So let's look at a verse to see what the Bible says about being in debt. Can someone read Romans 13:8 for us?
I'll read it. Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law.
Thank you. A different translation of that says, "Let no debt remain outstanding except for the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law." There's other verses as well that I think speak to this, where I think you can. It's clear that God does not want us to be in debt. The average graduate today owes over $35,000 in school loans, so it's very likely that most of you, if not all of you, will have some sort of debt as soon as you graduate from college. So I would encourage you to try to start paying those down as soon as you can. There's different ways. If you have multiple loans, you can consolidate those, maybe lower the interest rates. If some loans might have higher rates than others. And if that's the case, try to more aggressively pay off whatever loan has the highest interest rate first. Attack that one first before paying the lower interest rate ones. One thing that you can do when you're out of college is you could work with someone like me, who's a financial advisor, who can help you go through that, of looking at what your debt is and coming up with a plan on how to pay that down. When you have a lot of debt, it could tie you to stay in a job that you don't really like, or to live somewhere that you don't really want to live. It's hard to make good choices if you have a lot of debt that you feel like you can't take a risk of trying a different career or something like that, because you need the income that you have to keep up with the debt payments. Debt can cause a lot of anxiety, and so I think you can be a lot healthier with less debt as well. The number one reason that couples that are engaged call off a wedding is due to financial debt. Finances can be a huge conflict in married couples even, and so it's important to be on the same page if you can, and to have the same priorities when it comes to money. All right, so going back to the budget, we said the first priority is tithing. The second priority is saving and then paying down your debt. The third priority would be your housing and utilities. So you're going to have to live somewhere, and that's going to cost money, and so you need to budget for what that expense will be like. I think one common problem people sometimes fall into is trying to live above their means, or trying to live exactly like your parents are, even though they're twice your age and it took them a long time to get to where they are, and are thinking that you want to be in the same place right out of college, but they probably weren't at that place when they were your age. And so have realistic expectations, and don't expect to have a certain lifestyle immediately out of college. One piece of advice that I think is good, if you're married, maybe not consider both of your salaries when you're figuring out how much you want to spend on housing. If you sign a mortgage, you have a fixed payment that you have to pay every month for the next 30 years, and you don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now. Your income might go down, and that can cause a lot of problems if all of a sudden your housing is taking up a bigger chunk of your income than it was before. This actually happened to me. My wife and I were both working, and we planned to continue working. But when we had our first child, she was really sick and needed a liver transplant, and she was in the hospital a lot. So my wife ended up quitting her job and staying home, which we hadn't planned on. And so suddenly our income was reduced almost in half, and that made it a little bit challenging with the house payment that we had. But when we bought the house, we just assumed that we were both going to continue working and we'd have that income. And so if you leave a little bit more buffer in your budget, it can make things a little bit easier if something unexpected comes up down the road. The next section would be an automobile, and we've already talked about this a little bit, that I would encourage you to buy a used car over a new car, pay cash if you can, and start off small and save money until you can afford something nicer. The next section would be household items. This might include groceries, eating out, gifts, clothing, haircuts, cosmetics. There's lots of different ways you can do your budget. So you can be as specific or broad as you want to be. And so if you want to budget each of these different items separately, you can, or if you just want to have one item that's called household that includes all of that, you can do it that way as well. There's not really a right or wrong answer there, but there's lots of ways in this area where you can save money. For example, a lot of people might eat out for lunch every day, and that really adds up compared to if you pack a lunch and take it with you to work. It may not seem like a lot of money if you're saving $7 or something like that, but if you're doing it 5 days a week, that really adds up week after week, month after month. It's kind of amazing when you look at how much you're spending over an entire year. That's one example of a way that you can try to save money, or maybe buy certain things in a generic brand versus the major brand name. You could shop for clothes at Goodwill. I mean, there's lots of ways you can figure out ways to save money. These are just some examples. All right, so the next section would be entertainment or going on vacations. Again, this is something that is kind of low on the list. You want to make sure that all the other things are more needs. These are more wants. That it's great if you have the money to do these things, but make sure that before you start spending money on vacations or entertainment, that you're covering your tithe and your saving and your housing and things that are a little bit more important. The last thing, well, I guess one more. I guess this would be before entertainment. I'm sorry. This would be insurance. So you're going to have to pay for insurance for your vehicle, and car insurance has gone up a lot recently. It can be a fairly expensive thing. I would encourage you to have life insurance, especially once you have children. I think that's really important to have life insurance. A lot of jobs will offer some sort of insurance through your employer, and so sometimes you'll get that free and you won't have to pay anything for it. And so that's great to take advantage of that if they offer that, but not every employer does. But term life insurance, there's different types of life insurance out there, but term life insurance is pretty inexpensive, and I think especially once you have children, it's important to have, so that if something were to happen to you, you can take care of them for at least a certain amount of time. So you can meet with someone like me to talk about insurance. There's also people that only do insurance, like State Farm, places like that. And so it's definitely something that I think you should consider looking into, especially, like I said, once you have children. Life insurance gets more expensive as you get older, so the younger you are, the healthier you are, the cheaper it is, and you never know when you might be diagnosed with an illness or condition that might prevent you from getting insurance. So if you have a serious illness and you try to apply for insurance, you might get denied and you might not be able to get any. And so if you buy it when you're young and healthy, you'll have it there in place. And a lot of times if you have a policy, you can add to it later if you want to increase the amount. So I think it's really good to start that in your 20s if you can. And then the last item for the budget would be just miscellaneous. So this would cover anything that we haven't covered already. we all have different things we like to spend money on, and so this can be, whatever that miscellaneous amount covers. Like I said, I think when you first start budgeting, it's probably going to take you several months, maybe even a year, to figure out exactly how you want to spend your money. So just start off with how you think you want to do it, and then each month, if you need to adjust it, you can increase one section and decrease another section. If you need to shift money around and say that you're actually spending more on utilities than you thought you would, or groceries are costing more than you thought they would, you can increase that section, but you're going to have to take it from one of the other budgeted areas. And so it's kind of a trade-off of what's most important. If you're struggling with staying in the budget, or if you're struggling with credit cards, a great way to kind of help you stick to this is an envelope system. So you can, when you get your paycheck, you can go to the bank and take it all out in cash. You can have an envelope for each section of your budget. You put the cash in the envelope, and then you have that to spend for the next month. And when the envelope's empty, that's it. You can't spend any more than that. You're done for the month. And it's just kind of I think it's maybe a way to kind of really see how much you're spending compared to if you're just using a credit card. It might not be as clear how much you're spending. So that envelope system is a good way to kind of force yourself to stick to it. Another way you can do that is using like a virtual wallet. So one system I use is I have multiple bank accounts through a bank called Capital One. There's other banks that do this, I think, but Capital One, you can open up as many savings accounts as you want. There's no minimums or fees. And so I kind of use this as a way to budget, where I would have 6 or 8 different savings accounts. Each month when my paycheck would come in, it automatically gets divvied up to these 8 different savings accounts that are earmarked for different things. And then when I would spend money, I would transfer money out of that account to cover it. So it's the same philosophy as using the envelopes, but it's a way that I wouldn't have to carry cash around with me. But you still kind of have to keep track of how you're spending the money. So there's different ways you can do that. If it's something you're struggling with, I would encourage you to have accountability. You can talk with a trusted friend that might be able to help you with this. If you're married, that can be your spouse. It's really important to communicate, make sure you're on the same page about how you want your money to be used. When you're first starting out, Dave Ramsey recommends to save at least $1,000 in your emergency fund. Do that first before you pay off debt. Then once you have $1,000 set aside for emergencies, start paying off your debt. Once your debt's paid off, then try to build up your emergency savings to where it could cover 3 to 6 months worth of whatever your expenses are. So if you know what your monthly budget is, you multiply that by 6. That's generally what's recommended to have set aside in an emergency fund. So that'll take some time to get that built up, but at least set aside $1,000 to start, then pay off your debt, then try to build up 6 months worth of expenses. So that's kind of the basics of doing a budget. So here in a minute, I'm gonna have time for you guys to ask any questions you have. It could be about budgeting, investments, saving, insurance, whatever it might be. But one thing a challenge I want to leave for you guys is to think about what's one thing you could do in the next week to start living out in a right relationship with money. What's something that maybe you could do better that you're not currently doing, that you think is a way that you could honor God with the way that you view money or think about money. And that might look different for each person, but just try to think of one way that you can be intentional the next week to think about how you can honor God with money. And then I think your homework for the week is to set up a budget and read through chapter 12. Is that right, Nettie? Yep. And I think Nettie's going to send you a link to a video that covers some of these Bible verses. I think you might have a couple others. There's a person who's similar to Dave Ramsey that I like. He has some really good videos. He has a free newsletter you can subscribe to. He's got a podcast. He also has some classes that are similar to Financial Peace University. I have not done any of those, but I think he has some really good free resources that are available. talking about how Christians should view money differently, or how can you start investing, or how can you do a budget, things like that. That's really helpful. So we're going to send you some more information about that. So yeah, so I'll open up to any questions that anybody has.
I know this like changes a lot, but how much right now is enough, like considered enough to retire on?
That really varies a lot. So it's a good question, but there's no clear-cut answer. I'm really surprised with people's spending habits just vary so much. So, you know, I have some clients that were both teachers, never had really high income, but they just always lived within their means and saved well, and then they were able to retire. They had over $1 million, and my challenge is to get them to spend it. Like they've got used to this lifestyle where they don't eat out much, they don't travel, they drive old cars, and they just live really simply, and they can live on $30,000 a year they get from Social Security, and they don't need much else. But I have some other clients that probably spend, you know, $10,000 a month, and so there really is no set answer. But I do think that, like I mentioned before, if you save 10% a year, your whole career, I think by the time you're age 65, 67, somewhere around there, that you should have enough set aside to cover your retirement, as long as your habits don't change. So it doesn't mean when you retire you can suddenly start spending twice what you did while you were working, but you should have a similar lifestyle in retirement that you had while you were working if you're able to save 10 to 15%. So yeah, it's a hard question to answer. Generally, the rule of thumb is in retirement we try to recommend to not spend more than 4% of your portfolio if you want it to last 25 years or longer. If you're the more you take out each year, the faster it's going to be depleted. Studies have shown that 4% is generally a safe amount to not really be dipping into the principal very much. So that's kind of a way that you can work it backwards. If you want to say, in retirement, I want to have $50,000 a year to live on, you can divide by 4%, and that'll tell you how much you need to have set aside to produce that level of income.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, one of the questions that we get a lot when you go to actually sign your job offer and you're having to make decisions about retirement, the 401k, and all that, or maybe your company that you sign with don't have a retirement account and you have to set up a Roth IRA or something like that. Can you kind of give some tips about that?
So a lot of employers have some sort of employer-sponsored retirement plan, but not all employers do. Those can vary. It could be a 401k or a 403b. There's different types out there. But a lot of companies will do what's called an employer match, which means if you contribute some to this retirement plan, they will match it. So if your employer does that, I definitely recommend doing that. Usually it's only like 2 or 3 or 4%. It's usually not a big amount. So I usually would recommend be saving more than that, but make sure you're at least doing whatever they will match, because if you're not, you're just kind of leaving money on the table that could be set aside for you for retirement. So that's the first priority, is to take advantage of any match they offer. If, let's say it's 3% and you want to be saving 10%, outside of that, you could contribute as much as you want. Not as much as you want. I think there are limits, but they're pretty high. You could contribute to that. Let's say it's a 401k. Other options you would have is you could open up an IRA outside of your employer-sponsored plan. So an IRA stands for Individual Retirement Account, and that's money that you're setting aside for retirement. There's penalties if you take it out before age 59 and a half. So the government really wants, if you put money into this, they really want it to be earmarked for retirement. They don't want you taking it out before retirement. There's different types of IRAs. The main two are a traditional IRA and then a Roth IRA. And the main difference between those is how they're taxed. So a traditional IRA is basically deferring your income until later. So when you put money into a traditional IRA, you get a tax deduction today, but it's really not a deduction. It's really, you're really taking a loan, because you're going to have to pay back that money or the taxes on that to the government later. So let's say if you earn $100,000, you put $10,000 in an IRA, that reduces your income by $10,000 today, but you're going to have to pay tax on that money eventually. So that money grows tax deferred in the traditional IRA, and then if you pull it out at age 65, you have to pay tax on it then. The problem is, if you put $10,000 in today and you let it grow for 40 years, that $10,000 could be $70,000, and so you're gonna end up paying tax on $70,000 instead of $10,000 today. And so that's the huge advantage of the Roth IRA, is when you put money into a Roth IRA, it grows tax-free forever, unless they change the rules, which I don't think they're going to do. But if you put $10,000 in today and it grows to $70,000, when you take it out in retirement, you don't pay a penny in tax on the full $70,000. So that's a bigger advantage the younger you are. So especially for you guys, if you're saving after college, if your employer-sponsored plan offers a Roth option, I definitely recommend doing that over a traditional option, because if you let it grow for a long time, it could be a huge difference, and you'd much rather be able to take that out tax-free. I think it's a really common problem for people that have money all in pre-tax accounts. You retire, you've got this big chunk of money set aside, but you have to pay 25–30% of that in taxes when you take it out. That's a big chunk that all suddenly isn't yours anymore. It's the government's money. But if it's in a Roth, you don't have to pay any taxes. So do the match first, then do a Roth IRA if you can. There's limits to how much you can do. Today it's $6,500 per year. So 10% of your income could be more than that. If it is, you can just save in a non-retirement account that you set aside. So there's lots of different ways you can do it, but there's different contribution limits to 401ks and IRAs, and it's kind of complicated with how they're all a little bit different, but definitely recommend taking advantage of that if you can.
Can you talk a little bit about what it means to be vested or not vested to get that back if you're switching jobs or something?
Yeah, so for some employer plans, you'll vest 100% on day one, which just means it's your money. If you leave the company, you can take it with you. Some have a vesting schedule where you might not, it might take 5 years, let's say, before you're vested. And so if you leave the company after 4 years, you don't get any of that money. So it's basically, if you don't work there for 5 years, you get nothing. You have to stay for 5 years to be eligible to get it. Some will have a decreasing scale where you vest 10% a year. So if you stay there for 2 years, you get to keep 20% of it or 40% of it. So there's different ways that can work, but hopefully when you start with your job, they'll have someone in the HR department or someone that can explain how that works. But I think a lot of times you might not get the best information, or they might not be real detailed in handing that out, so you might have to ask a lot of questions or track down someone who can help you answer those questions if it's not clear how that works. But that kind of varies. It's different from company to company.
What other questions?
I have like a question, or like just asking. So like, I don't really know how to word it, but like, what if you get into like a tough position and like you are in debt, or there's expensive car payments or whatever? I've never really done this. Or there's expensive health or surgery issues. Like, what do you do in those situations?
Good question. I think the first thing to do is to pray about it and ask for God to step in and help you throughout the situation and help give you guidance on what to do. I don't know if I have a clear answer as outside of that. I think it's okay to ask for help from, I don't know if you have family or friends that might be able to help you out through that time. Whether that be through raising money somehow, or giving you a loan, or I'm not sure exactly what that might look like, but don't try to tackle it on your own. Try to get help from others if you can. And yeah, I think outside of that, I'm not sure if I can give a general answer. I think it really depends on the situation and what the issue is, and but definitely give it up to God. I mean, God. I love it's not on here, but there's a verse talking about where God talks about how the sparrows don't worry about where they're going to find their food or what clothes they will wear, and I think it's just a good example of. I think God loves us more than He loves the sparrows, and yet the sparrows don't worry about that. So I think it's something that we shouldn't be too worried about. That God will provide and take care of us, and yeah, there will be times where things are hard or seem hopeless, but I do believe that God is faithful in that and that He does provide. But there will probably be times in some of your lives where it might feel like that's not the case, or it seems like the situation is really bad. But I feel like God is faithful, and usually He will step in some way to help out.
What would you say about like being involved in the stock market, buying stocks?
Well, I do recommend it. There's different ways you can invest money. That's one way, and that's a big part of my job, what I do. And historically, the stock market's a lot like gambling, to be honest. It's very risky. You can invest money and it can disappear overnight. The difference between, I think, the stock market and gambling, if you're talking about blackjack, for example, you have a 45% odds of winning. So the casino knows they want to keep you there as long as they can, because eventually you're going to lose all of your money because you have a less than 50% chance of winning. If we look back over the last 100 years or 50 years of the stock market, it's been fairly consistent that it's been positive about 74% of the time. So it's not positive 100% of the time. There's periods of time where the stock market goes down, but if you stay in the market long enough, there's never been a period of time where a 20-year period of time where you haven't made money. If you're looking at a short period of time, in 1 year you could lose 40%. The longer period of time you look, that risk decreases, and so I feel pretty confident. I can't guarantee what the stock market's going to always go up, but the stock market's been through a lot over the last 100 years, through different world wars, through pandemic, through all kinds of things, and companies have always found ways to persevere and make a profit, which is the main driver of how stocks do. And so I think it is a really good way to grow your money. Historically, stocks have averaged around 10% over long periods of time, and so I feel like there's not a lot of other investments where you can earn that rate of return. There are lower risk investments you can do where you earn 2 or 3% or 4% or 5% maybe. But if you're young, I think it's good to take a little bit more risk and to invest in things like stocks. So for example, that scenario we talked about earlier where Ann saves $200 a month and John does, in that scenario we're assuming that they're earning a 10% return. If we were to change that to a 3% return, those numbers are going to look very different. But it's pretty amazing that Ann, who just saved $24,000, that $24,000 would grow to $1.4 million, and that's due to the power of compounding interest. And if she's too conservative and she's not willing to take any risk, and she just puts it in a savings account where she's earning 1%, it's not going to grow nearly that much. So I do think it's good to invest in the stock market, but to know that it is very risky, and there will be periods of time when you lose money. But if you're young, you have enough time to recoup that. And every time we've seen the market drop in the past, it has always recovered. Sometimes it might take a few years to get back to where it was, but usually it doesn't take more than 2 or 3 years to recover from any losses. So yes, I do think it's important to do that, and you can do that within your 401k or a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. Within any of those types of accounts, you can be as aggressive or conservative as you want. You could have a Roth IRA that's 100% in the money market, and it's not going to grow very much. So those accounts don't really determine how aggressive you are. You still have a wide range of investments you can use within each of those different types of accounts. I think it's also important to note that each of us has a different tolerance for risk. So generally when I'm trying to recommend an allocation for someone, the two main factors are your age, or how long you have until you're going to spend the money, but the other factor is your tolerance for risk. So some people just cannot tolerate risk, and that's okay. If that's the case, you can be a little bit more conservative. I don't recommend you putting yourself in a position where you're losing sleep at night because you saw your account balance drop, and it's giving you anxiety and you're constantly worrying about it. That's not healthy. And so if that's the case, you probably have too much risk and you should have less in the stock market or have more money that's in safer investments. And so there's no right answer that's going to apply to everyone. Some people, it doesn't bother them when they see the fluctuations. Some people it does, and again, that's not right or wrong. It's just we all have a different tolerance for that. So you have to kind of know yourself as well when you're determining how aggressive you should be or how much you should have in high risk investments like stocks.
I have another question. So I'm a pet lover. My parents have a pet cat. I know that they're very expensive, but like, when do you think it's like the best time to get a cat or a dog, like just one? Like 10 years after college, 20?
Yeah. So I don't know if there's a good time. Pets can be very expensive. It kind of depends on where you get the pet. If you're getting it from a shelter or if you're paying from a breeder, and different breeds maybe cost more. I don't know a lot about cats, but I know more about dogs. Some dogs can be really expensive. But then the other factor is vet bills can be really high. And so one of my friends, I know his kids really wanted him to get a dog, and they basically had to agree before they got one that they weren't going to spend over X amount of dollars at the vet. And so they're like, if the dog gets hurt or gets an illness and it's going to be $5,000, we're all agreeing before we get a dog that we're going to split the dog down. So I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, but I think it just kind of depends on your situation, how much money you have in your budget to spend on that, if it's a priority, how important it is to you. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer, but if it's something that you can fit within your budget, then I think it's okay to do. But if you're struggling getting by month to month and you're not saving enough, then maybe it's not a good decision to do that right now. But if you're tithing and saving and you have extra money, then sure, I think it's okay to do.
There's pet insurance policies these days too.
Yeah, that's true.
But my sister did the same thing. She was like, "This is the cutoff."
Since we're kind of running over on time, I'm going to go ahead and close this out in prayer. And if you guys have any prayer requests, put them in the group meeting. I know Shayna's sick tonight, so I told her that we pray for her. But if anybody else wants to hang out and ask Garrett questions, I'm going to keep it rolling so those that are not here can still hear the discussion. So let's just close in prayer, and if you need to leave, that's fine. Dear Lord, I thank you so much for Garrett, and thank you for just him sharing his wisdom about finances, and I just thank you for just all that we were able to hear tonight. I pray that you would just be with each one of these students as they are making decisions about finances. I pray that they would just always put you first and seek you in all the decisions that they're making. I pray for Shayna and all the other people that are not here tonight. Just please heal her and help everyone with whatever they're dealing with if they were not able to be here tonight. And I just pray that you would just be with all of us as we go throughout our week. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, you need to leave. That's cool. If you want to ask more questions, Garrett.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I should ask. Are you
Yeah, I'm
okay?
okay. And also, I guess if you think of other questions after tonight, and you want to ask me, you can get my contact information.
Yeah, I'll put in an email and.
Feel free to send me an email if you have questions after tonight.
I was just gonna ask, so you were talking about like, starting investment for retirement early versus, 10 years later, right, you're comparing the two, but what if you were to flip it and talking about retiring early? Because I know you're talking about a lot of those retirement accounts will have some sort of age minimum or else you're gonna get penalized for it. So if you wanted to retire, say like, 60 or 55, something like that, would you just have to invest and save like a ridiculous amount of money in order to afford those penalties, or can it be done with a reasonable amount of money?
Again, I think it depends on your situation and what your lifestyle is, how much money you need to spend, because that can vary a lot from person to person. That's a good point, though. That is one advantage. Another advantage of the Roth IRA compared to the traditional IRA is with the traditional IRA, and I believe this is the case for 401k as well. Any withdrawal before 59.5 has a penalty. With the Roth IRA, you can withdraw your contributions at any time before age 59.5 with no penalty. You just can't withdraw your earnings. So if you put in $5,000 and it grows to $6,000, and then a year later you have an emergency, you can't pull out the full $6,000 that's in the account, but you can pull out the $5,000 that you put in without any penalties. I think there's a 5-year rule where the account has to be open for at least 5 years before you can do that. But once you're past that hurdle, that's kind of a nice feature. I mean, I encourage you not to do that if you can. I mean, you want to set it aside for retirement, but it is nice that it has that flexibility that, let's say you wanted to retire at 58, you could start taking money out at that age without any penalties. I think the other thing I would say is, hopefully you don't suddenly come to the realization at age 55 that you want to retire immediately. Hopefully, if you have a goal of retiring at 55, you might figure that out by age 50, and you can start saving in a non-retirement account at that point and setting some money aside for a few years that you can spend in those next few years until you get to 59.5. So, I think there's ways you can do it, but I think you definitely want to avoid those penalties if you can. So. You probably would not want to retire early unless you are able to set enough money aside outside of a retirement account to help you at least get to that point, if that makes sense.
This is probably really situational, but how soon and how much do you start saving for like kids? And also, how much do they cost?
Great question. Yes, great question.
I highly doubt too many people start saving for kids before having kids. I don't think that probably happens realistically very often. It's not a bad idea to do it, but I don't think it probably happens. But kids can be very expensive. The main thing that I plan for is saving for kids' college, and that can be overwhelming. You guys know what it costs to go to Purdue. A lot of schools are more expensive than Purdue. I know when my first daughter was born, at the time we were living in Colorado, when we looked up what the average cost was for public school in Colorado and how much do we need to start saving now. And it was like, if we wanted to cover the full cost, it was like we need to be saving $300 a month. And we're like, we can't do that right now. So yeah, I mean, if you can start saving for that sort of thing, great. But I don't think too many people do that. But again, it depends on the kids and what their activities are, and if they're healthy or not. And again, it depends on the parents, if they like buying a lot of clothes for the kids, or if they get hand-me-downs or buy clothes at Goodwill. I mean, the expenses really vary a lot, so it really depends. But wouldn't hurt to plan ahead for that. But they can be very expensive. I don't remember the number, but I know I've seen a statistic of what it costs to raise a child from birth to age 18, and I want to say it's something like $200,000 or something. Like it varies from person to person, but it's a lot of money. So.
Yeah, I know something I thought of, something that happened to us is we lived in Texas and we set up the 529s for our kids. And actually Garrett's dad was our first financial advisor, and he let us know when we moved here that the Indiana 529 was like way better than the Texas one, because you could get like tax breaks and stuff for the amount that you put in. So we like literally moved everything here, which we would have never done if he hadn't told us that, because there'd been no reason to. So just like check with each state, because there can be some major benefits. Like we get, what is it, $1,500 break a year if we put in $7,500 a year, I think is the new one,
You
right?
get 20%
20% yeah.
back,
Yeah.
up to the maximum you get back is $1,500. Yeah. Per
So
year.
it's a huge break.
Can you give out your email or?
I'll put it in the group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not a person who emails like crazy.
Any last questions or anything? All right. Well, thanks for being here, Garrett.
You're welcome.
We really appreciate you.
Yeah.
And
Okay.